diving into the incredible conversation happening between your gut and your brain. This two-way chat shapes everything from stress and mood to focus, sleep, and even how we connect with others. Joining us to guide us through this fascinating world is Dr. Caitlin Hall. Caitlin's a registered dietitian, neuroscientist, and microbiome researcher specialising in the gut-brain axes and female health. She completed her PhD in neurosciences and gut microbiology at the University of Queensland and was a visiting researcher at King's College London. As head of research at Myota, she studies how prebiotic fibres can support cognitive function, lift mood, reduce inflammation, and build resilience to stress. So get ready to discover the science behind prebiotics, the gut-brain connection, and practical ways to harness this amazing system to boost your everyday health. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Caitlin Hall with her talk, Brain Food, the Role of Prebiotic Fibre in Reducing Stress.
Thank you, Catherine. That's all working? Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me here. I am delighted to be talking about my favourite topic in the world, which is the gut-brain axis and specifically prebiotic fibre. Before we start, I think it's worthwhile to mention that we live in a microbial world. They were here a long time before we were, and there's never been a time in human evolution that we haven't lived without our microbes. They've evolved with our immune system, our brain development, and pretty much every aspect of physiology that we're only just beginning to understand now. So any talk about the gut-brain axis, we have to remember, cannot happen without those microbes. So a little bit of appreciation for our microbiome. From the top of your head to your toes, you are covered in trillions of microbes. In fact, on your thumb alone, there are more microbes than there are people in the UK. About 100 trillion of them that we know live on and around the human body. The largest population of those bacteria actually live in our gut, which I'm sure you all know if you've been here for a hot minute at this festival. We know that there's about 500 species that can colonize the gut, and collectively they weigh up to 1.5 kilos. That's about the size of a human brain. So that was pretty humbling for some of my neuroscientist colleagues back in the day. While this is still a really early research field and we're still understanding more and more about the relationships between, the gut health and everything else that comes from it, 90% of chronic disease can be linked in some way back to the gut and the health of microbiomes living in our body. So if this is such a really important thing, like if we all need a really healthy gut microbiome, what does that actually mean? And there's still a lot of dispute between researchers in the field about what elements constitute a healthy microbiome, but there's one factor that all researchers and people in clinics realize is the most important thing for the microbiome, and that's diversity. So diversity is made up of two different components. It's made up of richness, that's the sheer number of species you have in your gut, and also evenness, so what's the distribution of them? And a really nice way to think about diversity is like any healthy forest ecosystem. You've got the tall canopy trees and they're providing shelter and they're regulating the temperature underneath. You've got the shrubs and the smaller trees and they're helping with nutrient stability. You've also got, birds and bees and insects and they're helping with pollination and also keeping, harmful species and their numbers in check. So we can think about the gut microbiome like you think about the forest. Different bacterial communities contribute different functions to the human body and to our health. So some bacterial groups, they'll help produce vitamins and neurotransmitters. Other groups of bacteria will help fight off harmful pathogens. And then there's another group of bacteria that help produce really important anti-inflammatory substances called short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, so just remember that word for now. But when there's imbalance in the gut, that's when we see a complete deforestation of our microbiome. So key bacterial species that really reduce in terms of their diversity. And that leads to things like gut imbalances, it leads to, sluggish bowels, it leads to even things like poor mood, stress, and anxiety. So some of the things that contribute to an imbalanced microbiome are antibiotics, absolutely life-saving, but overuse of antibiotics can completely wipe out the good and the bad bacteria in your gut. So be very cautious with how often we use antibiotics. Infection, any sort of gut infection, that also wipes out some of the good bacteria in your gut too, leaving an imbalance of the good bacteria. The carnivore diet, now don't hate me for this, I know I get a lot of hate, but people who only consume meat and they remove plants from their diet, that is possibly the worst thing that you could be doing for your gut microbiome. So please don't follow the carnivore diet. And the other one is the low FODMAP diet. So if you've heard of this one before, often it's recommended if you have something called irritable bowel syndrome or IBS. Fantastic tool to help reduce your symptoms, but we do need to be careful about how often we stay on that low FODMAP diet, because it does restrict things like plants, fibre, and all the good things that your gut bacteria thrive and need to be healthy. So there are all the terrible things, all the things that, occur, like deforestation of your gut microbiome. What are the things that we can do to improve your gut microbiome? And it's probably not going to be a surprise when I say the single most important thing for your gut microbiome is fibre. So yep, the stuff found in fruits, veggies, nuts, seeds, grains, all plant-based matter. And most of you in this room are probably very aware of the fact that fibre helps with good digestion and regular bowel movements. And actually some of you will be aware that fibre also helps to reduce your cholesterol levels and helps balance blood sugar levels after a meal. But this is where the story gets a bit more interesting. So one of the most important roles that fibre may have in terms of gut health and gut microbiome health comes from a very specific type of fibre called prebiotic fibre. So not all fibre is prebiotic fibre. Only some types of foods like asparagus, onions, garlics, oats, green banana, some leeks, only specific types of foods contain prebiotic fibre. And the definition of prebiotic fibre is that it selectively feeds your good gut bacteria. And when they do that, as I mentioned, they produce these amazing substances called short-chain fatty acids. So why do I keep talking about short-chain fatty acids? Why are they important? Well, when our gut bacteria break down the fibre by our microbiome, that's when they're producing short-chain fatty acids like butyrate and propionate. They are incredible tools to help not just in the gut, but throughout the body. One of their key roles is regulating inflammation. They also maintain the healthy gut lining. So you might have heard of something called leaky gut before. So short-chain fatty acids help tighten those gaps between the gut cells to help things not pass through that aren't supposed to, but help with things like nutrient absorption and things that should leave the gut should be leaving in the right way. It also supports a healthy immune system. So we know that 70% of the immune system resides on the gut lining. Short-chain fatty acids help regulate that balance. Also help with blood sugar control as well. So more short-chain fatty acids, better blood sugar control and insulin sensitivity. And finally, and this is something that I'll be focusing most of the rest of the talk on, is that short-chain fatty acids can communicate with the brain, both directly and indirectly. And this is how it has that relationship to things like mood, stress, anxiety, sleep, memory, all of those things we're now beginning to understand. However, we are in a bit of a crisis. So the UK, 90% of us are not consuming enough fibre. We are fibre deficient. Everyone at the moment is talking about protein, adding protein powder to shakes, drinks, smoothies, everything. Only 10% of the UK are actually deficient in protein, whereas 90% of the population are deficient in fibre. Just flip it totally on its head. The story gets worse. 30 grams, is what the NHS recommends that we consume in terms of dietary fibre. We're getting 15, so we're getting half of what we need. And that's putting us at a really big disadvantage when it comes to our health, our chronic disease risk, and again, things like mood, stress, and anxiety. So what do we know so far? We know that a diverse microbiome is a healthy microbiome. Fibre, and especially prebiotic fibre, feeds your healthy bacteria and lets them produce those important anti-inflammatory substances called short-chain fatty acids. But we are in a crisis. So the UK has a chronic fibre deficiency. I'm going to take a breath now and talk about stress. So 74% of adults in the UK feel overwhelmed or unable to cope due to the stresses in life. So 3 out of 4 people sitting in this tent are feeling overwhelmed or stressed at some point in their life. 9 in 10 people have felt really high levels of stress at some point as well. So most people in this room can probably understand what that feels like to be in really heightened stress. Pretty common. The question is, and something that I want to talk about, is can we reduce stress by improving the health of our gut and, more importantly, of our gut microbiome? And the idea that our gut and brain are in communication with each other is like deeply embedded in our language. We have all this terminology to describe the neurobiological basis of a gut feeling. We say we're gutted when we're devastated by something. We say we have butterflies in our stomach when we're feeling nervous or anxious. And we have a gut feeling when we have intuition about something. So it's really everyday language that we use. But there is the science behind it to show that the gut is intricately linked to the brain. And we call this the gut-brain axis. And that's the idea that signals are constantly moving from the gut to the brain via nerves, via the bloodstream, via hormones. And similarly, the brain is always talking to the gut via, again, neuronal projections and fast-acting messages. They're kind of like teenagers talking on the phone back and forth constantly for hours late at night. So how does this work in the context of stress? How exactly is the gut influencing how we're feeling on a day-to-day basis when it comes to stress? So this is ignore the complexity of the figure because we'll go through it. You've actually seen this one already. So this is the relationship between prebiotic fibre and short-chain fatty acids. I want to spend a bit of time talking about the mechanisms. So how exactly does the bacteria in the gut actually affect something in the brain? There's 3 different pathways that I wanted to talk about, all of them relating to short-chain fatty acids. So you've already got part of the message. The first one relates to something called the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is a long neuronal projection that starts in the brain and connects to many different organs in the body, including the gut. And you've probably heard that what happens in Vegas, it stays in Vegas, but this is 100% not the case when it comes to the vagus nerve. What happens in the vagus nerve goes through the whole body. This is where the gut comes into it. So we know that the whole lining of the gut has those neuronal projections on it called, the vagus nerve. Short-chain fatty acids, when they're produced in the gut, they can actually synapse onto these vagal receptors and travel within seconds to the brain. Once they're in the brain, they come into this specific area called the nucleus tractus solitarius. This is kind of like the relay station in the brain, and then it's projected up to these brainstem and midbrain regions to subcortical and higher cortical regions. These areas are the ones in charge of the safety signals. So when you're feeling stressed or anxious, they're the ones in control of that higher order decision processing. So the fact that these vagus signals can come up and can come to, your medial prefrontal cortex at the front of your brain, that can help regulate things like stress. And it can even do so in a way that downregulates cortisol, which is actually our major stress hormone. So we can then modulate the hormone release coming from the brain and then connecting back to the gut. The second pathway is how short-chain fatty acids upregulate things like neurotransmitters in the brain. So you've probably all heard of serotonin. Everyone calls it the happy hormone. Well, 90% of serotonin is produced in the gut, but the serotonin produced in the gut can never make it to the brain. They are 2 separate pools. Serotonin is too large of a molecule to actually pass through the gut and travel in the bloodstream to the brain. However, the precursor to serotonin is tryptophan. People think of it like found in turkey, chicken, makes you sleepy. Tryptophan is 1 step removed from serotonin. And the good news is tryptophan can actually pass through the gut lining and travel and enter the blood-brain barrier to then be converted to serotonin. Short-chain fatty acids help upregulate the amount of tryptophan that can move through the gut and enter the bloodstream. So indirectly, short-chain fatty acids are having an effect on how much serotonin we have available in our brain, which is pretty cool. The final one is a immune-related pathway, and that's related to inflammation. And you might have heard earlier in this week, if you've been to other talks, that inflammation in the gut doesn't stay in the gut either. It travels throughout the body. These inflammatory cytokines, these little nasty guys here, they increase the gaps between the cells, and they can pass through and have detrimental effects throughout the whole body. What short-chain fatty acids do, and we know by now, is that it regulates that inflammatory response and down-regulates the inflammation, not just in the gut, but in the brain too. So short-chain fatty acids can actually pass through the blood-brain barrier and have effects on inflammation both in the gut and in the brain, so working on both organs simultaneously. Whew, okay, I hope that wasn't too much. That was really deep into the science, but I hope that was okay. Now we've got the basics of how the gut communicates with the brain. What does the research actually tell us? And I think it's important to keep in mind that we're still really early in the research area. So I wanted to highlight 3 really fascinating studies around prebiotic fibre and stress that I think you might enjoy. The first one was in 119 adults, and this study was in 2023, so relatively recently. They randomly assigned the 119 adults into one of 4 groups. One group consumed a probiotic only. The second group had a high prebiotic fibre diet, so things like oats, asparagus, leeks, onion, garlic. They also took a placebo supplement, so, something that's doing nothing. The third group had just the high prebiotic fibre diet and the probiotic, and the fourth group had a placebo supplement. They consumed their given intervention every day for 8 weeks. And the results are, the high prebiotic fibre diet had reduced perceived stress, reduced mood disturbance, reduced anxiety, and improved self-rated sleep. In contrast, the probiotic-only group had modest improvements in well-being, but not much else. No effects were seen when you combine the prebiotic and the probiotic, which is quite interesting, and the placebo supplement. So it's a really interesting early study and a dietary study to show something's happening here when we give people prebiotics. Keep in mind, these are all done based on self-report surveys. So what happens when we combine the self-report surveys with biological measures? So this second study is in 45 adults, so slightly smaller than the study before. But interesting about this study is that they also measured cortisol levels, which is our stress hormone. So they were given either the prebiotic supplement, which I think in this study it was inulin, FOS, and GOS, 3 very effective types of prebiotics found in the onions and the garlics, or the placebo. This was a really short study. It was in 3 weeks, so very, very short when it comes to nutrition and food interventions. The results of this study, the prebiotic supplement group had a reduction in salivary cortisol levels after 3 weeks and an improvement in cognitive tasks related to attention and vigilance. Again, nothing in the placebo group, which is exactly what we like to see. The third study is actually one run by Myota. So we have a diverse prebiotic fibre supplement which contains around 9 different plant-based fibres. You can mix it into, water, coffee, tea, anything you like. We recruited 60 adults, and they either consumed the prebiotic supplement and the Mediterranean diet, or just the Mediterranean diet alone. And for those that don't know the Mediterranean diet, it's full of healthy plants, healthy fats, moderate meats, lean meats, really, really good stuff. It's almost the gold standard when it comes to the diet for mental health, and indeed for many different diseases as well. We got them to consume the diet and the supplement for 12 weeks every day. After those 12 weeks, we looked at blood-based measures. So we looked at inflammation in the blood, And then we also got them to fill out surveys on stress, mood, anxiety. Looking at the stress first, we saw a massive reduction in those perceived stress scores in the treatment group versus those just taking the dietary intervention. We also saw similar scores on a different stress scale. And most interestingly, when you look at people's blood biomarkers, so inflammation in the blood, we see a significant reduction in inflammation in the group taking the prebiotic fibre supplement. In terms of anxiety and depression, we saw something really similar. So significant changes in both of those measures in the treatment group, so the fibre group, compared to those just taking the dietary advice. And this is not to say that the Mediterranean diet doesn't work. It absolutely does work. But keep in mind that we just gave them advice to follow. They weren't, given the meals. They weren't sent delivery items. So there is a part of it which is it's really hard to adopt a new diet. So absolutely the Mediterranean diet is still a fantastic diet to have, but there is room for more sometimes when it comes to the microbiome. So what next? And this brings me to, I guess, what we're working on at Myota. We are a research-led company. We're always studying, we're always looking at different ways that prebiotic fibre can affect your health. We're about to launch the largest stress study that we've ever done. We're trying to recruit almost 200 people to this study, and we're going to look at the effects of our prebiotic fibre supplement versus a placebo supplement on things like blood-based markers, on stress, mood, anxiety, on your cognitive function, and a whole host of things. So this is where I talk a little bit about my study. If you know anyone who might be interested in participating, or anyone who's been involved in research before, you know that it is impossible to recruit people to your study. People don't have the time or the energy to do it. They say they'll do it, but they never do. So this is my opportunity to sort of tell the world and to tell London about the study that we're running. It's a 12-week study, so very similar to our last study. We'll be getting people to visit our London clinic. It's based in Old Street twice, once at the start of the study and once at the end of the study, and they'll be given a random sachet. It'll either be the myota, the prebiotic fibre, or the placebo supplement. But don't let the placebo put you off, because we also give everyone at the end of the trial 12 weeks of myota if you were given the placebo. So no one needs to stress about not receiving anything. And we do, for your time and, all the travel of visiting the clinic twice, we do reimburse people as well. So keep that in mind. QR code is there below, but I'm also really happy to answer all your questions on fibre, the gut microbiome, research, all of the above. And thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Caitlin, that was brilliant. Have we got any questions?
Every single time. The tryptophan that goes up into the brain, does it need anything else to convert? Does it need to do anything to convert to serotonin? Is there anything that we need to do for that, or does that just magically happen?
There is an enzyme in the brain. It's called TPH2. I can't remember what it stands for, tryptophan something, where it converts the tryptophan to serotonin. So yes, there is an enzyme that we require in the brain. We should already have it there, and I don't know of there's no nutritional things that we can do to...
You can't be deficient in that as far...
I don't know, no. Generally, you can create enzymes from protein.
Yeah.
So if you're having protein in your diet, you will be producing enough of the enzyme.
Yeah.
And as we know, only 10%
unless you're one of the 10%,
of people... Yeah, unless you're part of the 10%.
So I may be dumbing this down a little bit, but it's my brain thinking about this. I think about the Rockefellers in the 1920s and where we've come in the last 100 years. For thousands of years, we ate fruits, vegetables, we lived off the land. And in the last 100 years, it's become fast food, it's become everything wrong, soft drinks, blah, 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 blah. And I was smiling throughout, because it was like, to me, this sounds like what our ancestors did for tens of thousands of years is what you've just talked about, and we've just beautifully scientifically... am I in the right ball?
Exactly. I think we've sort of reverse engineered everything, and and we're coming to realize that going back to those, everything unprocessed, going back to, diversity of vegetables and plants, and having, small bits of honey as your sweetener, all of those things we probably should be moving back towards. With some, supplements aren't really, but that, I completely agree. And yeah, the availability of processed foods and just the nutrient quality of food these days is nowhere near what it used to be.
But that's what's been killing us the last 100 years.
Yeah, exactly. Is the processed.
To get rid of that.
Yeah.
To go back to what we did before.
I think that's a nice message. There's someone called Michael Pollan. He wrote a book about it, and he said the one thing that we need to do is exactly simplify everything. Eat more plants, not too many. That's pretty much what you need to do. That's the one nutrition rule that we should probably be focusing, like diversity, plants, having balance.
And toxins as well, my mum sort of just asked.
Yes. Never die.
It's true. Yeah, it's
100,000 new toxins a year are coming into the environment.
Which makes it confusing, right? Like it's
Hence
hard.
probiotics. Yeah.
Exactly.
Any other questions?
I think one more question.
In my life, when I was prescribed antibiotic by my doctors, I always went home, throw away, and went to the chemist and I bought probiotics. And I can tell you, I did extremely well on this.
Yeah. There's actually, if you were here yesterday, I think Megan Rossi might have talked a little bit about probiotics. Anyone who needs to take antibiotics these days, there's a specific type of probiotic that you should be taking. And Megan obviously knows a lot about this, but yeah, the line of thinking is definitely right. Overuse of antibiotics is detrimental to the microbiome. But if you do have to take them, they are life-changing. But yeah, exactly what you said. Take your probiotic at the same time, or like a window 2 or 3 hours outside of it, and that will sort of attenuate some of the losses.
Even with the dentist, I do the same thing.
That's good. Thank you.
So thank you very much.